The lazy man who slept for 20 years, a long time ago. In the 50s here in the United States, in a small town surrounded by mountains, lived a lazy man with his wife. The lazy man had a small wooden house with a tin roof, a yard with skinny chickens and an old dog that almost never barked. Next to the house ran an irrigation ditch, which was an open channel where water was supposed to flow down from the hill. That ditch was used to water the cornfield and provide water for the town's animals. But for a long time, no water had run through it because it was blocked with branches, stones, and mud. The lazy man never bothered to clean it. His wife was the complete opposite. She would get up before dawn, light the stove, make tortillas, sweep the yard, and then go to the ditch. She would stand there looking at it with her arms crossed. The channel was dry, dusty. If anything, a tiny trickle of water would occasionally run, getting lost in the earth without reaching the furrows. "Just look at this," she would tell the lazy man when he was just coming out of the room, disheveled and yawning. "The ditch isn't flowing, the furrows are drying up. If you don't clean it today, we won't harvest anything this year and we're going to die of hunger." The lazy man would stretch, scratch his head, and always give the same answer. "Tomorrow, woman, I'll do it tomorrow," he would say, yawning. She would press her lips together, take a deep breath, and raise her voice. "Not tomorrow. The water gets fixed today, not tomorrow." But the lazy man never paid attention. He spent the morning sitting in the town square under the shade of a tree, chatting with the neighbors. He told old stories, exaggerated anecdotes, laughed out loud, and if someone asked for his help, he would come running. If a sack of corn needed to be carried, he was ready. If a neighbor needed him to watch her child for a while, he was delighted. For others, he always had time. For his own house, never. His wife grew desperate. One Wednesday, the day it was their turn for water, she stood in front of him with her hands on her hips. "The water should be flowing for us today," she said, pointing to the dry ditch. "Listen, you can't hear anything, not a single drop is running." "I'm going to check right now," the lazy man answered, getting up slowly. But instead of grabbing the shovel, he adjusted his hat and went straight to the plaza. He stayed there until the sun was setting. He returned home with dust on his pants, as if he had been working. His wife was waiting for him at the door. "What did you do?" she asked him harshly. "I was helping Juan with some sacks," he said, smiling. "And your ditch?" The lazy man shrugged his shoulders without responding. The days passed. The cornfield began to wilt. The corn leaves turned yellowish and shriveled. The animals lowed with thirst. The wife counted on her fingers. "If we don't have corn, what are we going to eat? What will we have to sell?" she would say, almost crying. "Man, don't you understand?" One dawn, tired of waiting, she pushed him out of bed. She placed the shovel at his feet. "Get up now. I'm sick of hearing you say tomorrow. Today is today. Either you fix the channel or you'd better get lost and go sleep on the hill." The lazy man didn't answer. He put on his sandals, slung his machete over his shoulder, and grabbed his hat. He walked towards the hill without looking back. He climbed the dusty path. The sun beat down on his back. He slipped several times on the loose stones but kept going. After a while, he reached a clearing in the middle of the trees. There he saw some strange men. They were dressed oddly, with jackets and hats that were not from his town. They were carrying heavy barrels. One of them, a man with a white beard, looked at him and said, "Friend, help us." The lazy man, who always helped when asked, approached. He pushed a barrel with all his might, ending up sweaty but satisfied. The man offered him a jug. "Here for the heat," the lazy man drank. The liquid had a strong, unfamiliar taste. He felt his head become light, his eyes heavy. He sat down next to a log to rest for a moment. He closed his eyes, just for an instant, and fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up, the sun was high in the sky. He got up dazed. His knees creaked as if they were much older. He touched his face and felt a long, coarse beard. He looked at his hands. They were wrinkled and spotted. He looked around. There were no barrels or men. The clearing was empty. He hurried down to the town with anxiety in his chest, but upon arriving, he recognized nothing. The familiar store had a big, bright sign. Through the windows, new songs could be heard from small radios. The children were playing with different toys. On the road, a huge truck passed by, bigger than any he had ever seen before. The lazy man quickened his pace to his house, but it wasn't his house. It was painted blue with flower pots on the porch. A dog he didn't know came out of the entryway, barking loudly. Behind it, a young woman appeared, looking at him with suspicion. "Who are you looking for, sir?" she asked. The lazy man swallowed, pointed at the door, the yard, everything that had been his. "Here, I used to live here," he said with a broken voice. "I am the lazy man." The woman looked at him strangely. "You don't live here." "We have lived here for many years." The lazy man felt a coldness in his chest. He turned around and walked to the plaza. There he sat on a bench with his head down. An old man approached him slowly. He looked him right in the face. "You're the lazy man." The lazy man looked up and recognized in his eyes a boy he had known a long time ago. "Yes, it's me," he replied uncertainly. The old man scratched his head. "Of course. You disappeared 20 years ago. Nobody knew anything about you. Your wife died a long time ago. Your daughter is a woman now with her own children, and your ditch got completely blocked. The water was lost. The lazy man was frozen. 20 years. Everything he had left for tomorrow no longer existed. With a weak voice, almost a whisper, he asked, "Where does my daughter live?" The old man, who recognized him with a sad gaze, raised his arm and pointed down a street, near the tire shop. "There, in that white house with the wooden gate. Go, and may God help you." The lazy man swallowed, adjusted his hat, and walked slowly. His legs felt heavy, as if he were dragging the 20 lost years. Every step was a blow of memory. When he arrived, he raised a trembling hand and knocked on the door 3 times. The door opened. A young woman with firm eyes and a mole on her cheek came out. The same mole he remembered from when she was just a little girl running barefoot in the yard. The woman looked at him without recognition. "What do you want?" she asked seriously with suspicion. The lazy man felt his voice get stuck, but he managed to say, "I am your father." The lazy man. The woman observed him for a long time, as if searching for something hidden in his wrinkles and his unkempt beard. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't throw herself into his arms. She looked at him fixedly and answered calmly, "My mother told me that if you ever came back, I shouldn't believe you with words. She told me you were good at talking, but bad at keeping promises. She told me that if you really were my father, you had to prove it, that you had to fix the ditch." The lazy man felt a lump in his throat. It was as if the words of his wife, the very one who had thrown him out, were returning through his daughter's voice. He lowered his head and could only say, "Give me a shovel." The woman looked at him for another moment, as if doubting whether he was in front of her or if he was a ghost. But finally she turned around and came back with an old shovel and a pickaxe. She handed them to him without a word. Then she closed the door and left him with the tools in his hand. That same afternoon, the lazy man walked to the ditch. The channel was dry, filled with large stones, crisscrossing branches and mounds of hard mud. He stood still for a moment, looking at the disaster. He swallowed, took a deep breath, and slammed the pickaxe into the dry earth. Clang, the impact shook his arms. The second blow gave him a blister on his hand. Sweat ran down his forehead, though he had barely begun. He doubled over in pain, but he did not stop. Blow after blow, he removed stones, broke up crusts of mud, clearing the way. The hours passed, the sun set, and the air grew cold. The lazy man was still there, his hands covered in dried blood and dirt, his shirt soaked with sweat. Every stone he removed seemed heavier, every branch tougher. Several times he thought of giving up, of leaving everything as it was. But then he remembered his wife's face, his daughter's words, the dry cornfield of his youth. "Today," he repeated to himself in a low voice like a prayer. Today is today. He worked alone the entire night. There were no curious neighbors, no company, only his own ragged breathing and the striking of the pickaxe. The town dog barked a couple of times in the distance, and then silence returned. Under the moonlight, the lazy man looked like a ghost digging in the earth. At dawn, he was exhausted, his muscles burning. His arms no longer responded well, but his eyes shone with a new strength. Suddenly, as he removed a plug of hard mud, he heard a different sound. First, it was a drop, then a thin trickle that began to move among the stones. The lazy man stood motionless. He bent down, cleared away more dirt with his hands, and then he saw it clearly. Water, the water that had been lost for 20 years. He straightened up, tears mixing with the sweat, and smiled for the first time in a long time. The water, timid at first, began to advance. Little by little, it flowed through the channel. pushing branches and mud until it began to run with more force. The lazy man followed it, stumbling, walking along the ditch, watching how each section he had cleared let the cool murmur pass through. When the sun was high, the water was once again reaching the yards and the fields. The town noticed. The women came out with jugs. The children ran barefoot to splash around. The men looked on in amazement at the living stream. Everyone asked the same thing. Who unblocked the ditch? And everyone received the same answer. The lazy man. At midday, exhausted, the lazy man sat on the bank, took off his hat, wiped his forehead, and breathed deeply, watching the water run. Then his daughter appeared. She looked at him in silence, her eyes moist, until she leaned in a little and told him firmly but with tenderness, "Now you are my father." The lazy man lowered his head. His voice trembled, but he managed to respond with tears in his eyes. "Today I understood that water does not wait." From then on, the lazy man changed completely. He no longer got up late. As soon as the rooster crowed, he was on his feet with his machete at his waist and his shovel on his shoulder. He would walk straight to the ditch. He checked that the water was flowing freely, removed branches, cleared away stones. Every day they saw him there working until the sun went down. The town noticed this too. Before, calling him lazy was an insult. Now his nickname became an example. When someone wanted to postpone a job, the neighbors would say, "Don't be like the lazy man from before. Be like the one from now." And everyone understood what they meant. The lazy man no longer got angry at his nickname. On the contrary, he accepted it with pride because he knew that now it meant something else. He knew he had lost 20 years, but upon waking up, he was still in time to change, and so his story remained, that of a man who was once idle and useless, who lost everything because of his laziness, but who in the end learned the most important thing, that life, like water, waits for no one. Amen.